You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
So today we're taking a little spin off of that series and talking about retirement. How can God use the years after we work for our good and for His glory? Well, today I'm excited to sit down with Greg Murphy and Glenn Lutz. Thank you guys for jumping in the podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here.
Hey, for those who don't know, Greg Murphy is an elder at our 528 campus, helps serve on our tech team with his wife, Carrie, and has attended Clear Creek for how long, Greg?
For 16 years.
16 years. Awesome. And Glenn Lutz, if you don't know him, serves as a navigator, serves on our finance team, helps set up at East 96, and has the joy of being my dad. So I'm looking forward to a conversation with him too. Dad, how long have you been at Clear Creek?
22 years, 3 months, and 17 days.
Not that you're counting or anything. Yeah.
22 years is probably what you're looking for.
Yeah, 22 years. So let me ask you both this before we jump in. Hey, do retired guys even listen to podcasts? Is this on your radar?
Odd what?
Greg, do you ever listen to him?
Occasionally.
Occasionally?
Not on a regular basis.
Yeah. I know you've listened to some, like even walking and doing some of those kind of things.
After
right?
retirement, I got into it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, obviously, today's conversation isn't just helpful for those who are retired. I think it's really helpful for those who are still working, too. So as you look back over your respective careers, I think you both have unique perspective and wisdom for those of us who are working as well. So we'll start with this. Tell us about your careers before retirement. Greg, let's start with you.
Okay. Early years, I worked a lot of construction jobs.
Okay.
I landed a position, pipe fitter, at Amoco Refinery in Texas City, and stayed in that, went to school at night, got a degree in 88, started in 83, got a degree in 88. A salary position opened in the process analyzer group, and I became one of the first process analyzer specialists. I did that for a number of years, I would say 10, and around 98, I moved into the capital projects group.
Okay.
At that time, there's a lot of environmental projects that required process analyzers, and they need specialist in that, so I did that, and I was I would say more a coordinator. I had the title of a engineer, project engineer, but it was more of a coordinator role, and stayed there till I retired in 2018.
So you worked your way up put yourself through school, kind of held different jobs in your career. Dad, what about you?
So I got out of school in 82, and then I went to work for a contractor at the NASA site here in Houston, and then moved over to the government in 88, and mainly worked with spacesuits or spacewalks, majority of my career. As the hair started turning gray, they kind of moved me up to more leadership positions, and then spent the last quarter of my career basically helping others succeed and meet their goals and the agency goals.
Cool.
And then did a little bit of planning toward what NASA's going to do in the future. That's kind of where I wrapped up.
Very cool. So NASA, Johnson Space Center, I worked for a contractor as well. I've told this story at East 96, Greg. You probably haven't heard this, but my grandfather worked at NASA, my dad worked at NASA, and I was the black sheep that became a pastor instead of going the science and math route. But both, like, impressive careers. I mean, God has used both of you in the workplace in different ways. One of the things we're talking about in this series, because Good Job series, is that God created us to work. So not necessarily a specific job, not just a project coordinator or an engineer, but to see the creation mandate in the scriptures, this idea that we're called to cultivate the earth, to exercise dominion, to be fruitful and multiply. So how did the creation mandate, how did the Christian worldview shape how you worked during your careers?
I think for me, it's there's always an honesty element in the work that you do. Regardless of whether people say it or not, bosses, coworkers, what have you, they see that and they realize that. we had for a number of years, had a Bible study group at church, met once a week, and there was quite a few, met quite a few people through it, and but I think that's one element of it. I don't know, there's a lot more to that. But.
Sure. Glenn, what about for you?
Well, I kind of always had a philosophy. I tried to work so that I could live and go out and do whatever God had me doing. Support my family, yes. I make sure that put food on the table and took care of what I was given responsibility over. But I didn't work. I didn't live so I could go to work. And so I tried to keep that idea going. I also kind of always have had in my DNA just kind of servant. And so working at NASA where you're trying to meet a goal together as a group and bring us all along on the team, I just fit as well as outside of work.
Yeah. So I saw a lot of that firsthand just being in your family, right? Your family and life balance, you shaped those things well. It was interesting for me running into people in town who knew you in the workplace and like, dude, your dad's a big deal. I'm like, my dad's a humble man. Like, I didn't know a lot of those things. I'm curious, being in a science-minded industry, how did your Christian worldview shape working in the science world, or did it?
It did. So there's a lot of PhDs at NASA, obviously. And then we've discovered a lot of cool stuff. But I was always able to see God's hand in that. Even the technology in the spacesuit arena. It's miniaturized so that we can go up in space and all that. But I was able to see God in that. And so that it just was a good fit for me. I never had that tension between the two.
Good. We did that Faith and Science series a while back, and a lot of our NASA people dug that, man, because we were speaking their language. There is a lot of PhDs, a lot of people asking science-minded questions, and so we can even link to that in the podcast for those in that world. One of the dangers of work and career is that we can tend to find identity in our work. So I'm a project coordinator, I'm an engineer, I'm a pastor, and I'm curious how you dealt with that during your career, but not only during your career, even as you retired. So like, did you find it difficult when that was no longer part of your identity when you moved into your retirement years? I'm curious about both of those. Like your identity while you're working, did you struggle with that? And then moving out of working, how have you processed that? We'll start with Greg.
I think I did to some degree. You wake up in the mornings and you're no longer going to what you do, and that's a bit strange. The identity part of it, I struggled a little bit. I wouldn't say to a great degree.
Yeah. What about for you?
I think early in my career, I probably introduced myself as I'm a NASA engineer.
Sure.
Then my daughter started calling me a nerd herd.
It's true.
And so that humbled me a little bit and put me in my place. I think as I got older, NASA was like number 4 on my priority list. I was a Christ follower, I was a husband, I was a father. Now I get to call myself grandfather. And so those were better terms. And so went from NASA engineer to, now I'm Brenda's husband. And I feel really good about all that. That transition.
I think there is a danger. I find it for me, like to find my identity in what I do versus who I am. So y'all have heard us talk about this around here, but spiritual growth, like our identity should drive our activity. Who we are determines what we do, not the other way around. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the series as we progress through this Good Job series. But I'm interested for you guys to give us some insight into retirement. So we're talking about the years after work. Give us some insight how you processed your readiness for that. How'd you know that it was time? Who were you processing that with? Just kind of walk us through how you got ready to retire. Dad, let's start with you on this one.
All right. So I had a pretty good model in my father. He retired when I was pretty young. I was still in college. But I got to see a little bit of that. He wasn't a very talkative guy either. So after he passed, I saw a lot of in his file cabinet, just reams of stuff that was really kind of interesting, gave me a perspective into that. So Brent and I just started talking about it, what retirement could look like. So just like any project we did at work, we kind of dreamed. Here's what it could look like. And so your DNA kind of drives that. This wasn't going to be, life of the millionaire guy, private jet, private islands, all that kind of stuff. So you kind of had a picture of what it could be, and then just like at work, you got to plan that out. So you go get with the right people, whether it's engineers and stress guys or financial guys and people who've been there, what I call gray hairs. So I went and talked to people and got some really good perspective and helped refine what the dream could look like. And then eventually you got to execute that. Right. And so then we started financially moving things and getting prepared for when the alarm goes off and you don't have to get up, when you can get up. So we executed the plan. So that's kind of the 3-part thing I would think about.
As just watching you do it, I mean, you were an engineer by trade, but you were an engineer towards your retirement. It's like, planning those things out, Excel spreadsheets, but it wasn't just the financial side of that. We talked about this before we get started, but not everybody has the financial means to be able to retire. There's some people who work till the day that they die, and it's a grace gift from God to have the finances that God has gifted you men to have to be able to do what you did. But I also watched you process, not just with work people, but with people in the church. Like the community of the church was helpful in that for you. You don't have to name names, but some guys that helped you process the spiritual side of that. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I talked about what one of my big goals was to continue to serve, find where God is, and then join Him there. Yeah. And so talking to people, what do you see in me that you can see me using that elsewhere? So I got a lot of good insights into that, and then through some networking, hooked up with some people that said, here's an opportunity. Go pray about that. And they were like, that's not a fit for me. And then now that I'm in there, oh my gosh, what a great fit that was. Good. That someone saw that I didn't see. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was the financial planning side. There was the what is next for me side that was tied to the spiritual stuff. And we're going to talk more about that here in a second as well. But Greg, I'm curious for you, how did you process your readiness for retirement? How did you know it was time for you?
The readiness part of it was, I could say years ago, took a Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University. That helped a lot as far as eliminating debt and that sort of thing. I kind of smiled when I read the question about this because I was part of a downsizing. I'd been at this location, I say this location, this refinery, it was actually on its third owner, but they had a downsizing, and I was part of that downsizing. So my readiness was to boot out the door. Yeah,
it wasn't necessarily your decision, but somebody else's decision. Yeah.
But I was blessed that we had a 401k, a pension, a matching savings plan. So kind of the combination of, what like I had said before, the Dave Ramsey part of it and getting rid of debt. And there's a little more. I'll talk about that later.
Cool. So stay on this readiness thing for a second. So I'm curious for you, Dad, what was the greatest motivating factor to take that step? Was it the dream that you had? Was it the finances were in place? Were there other things you wanted to do? Like, what was the greatest motivating factor for you to step into that?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think it was the opportunity to prioritize where God would use me rather than just fitting it in around work. Yeah. So when you're working, I still always wanted to serve. I was serving before that date as well, but able to prioritize around that was a big deal for me. On kind of the last question, you kind of talked about some wisdom that I was given. Yeah. I think one of the financial pieces that was given to me that was really helpful for me is, you always have to know what is enough. And people throw out numbers, but just talking and praying and working with Brenda and some financial people to define enough for me. And when you got to that, then you could prioritize. Yeah. And that made it much easier for me.
Yeah. It's a very different decision. But when I was ready to get married, I remember having a conversation with you over the phone about I don't know if I'm financially ready to be able to make this happen. And you're like, when it's the right thing to do, God will provide the finances for it. Right. And you may never feel like there's enough or you're ready, but when God makes it clear, it's often time to move and follow him. So So we talked about this a little bit. Go ahead. What were you saying, Greg?
No, I just said agreed.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit, but we all kind of dream about retirement. What's it going to be like? What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? Like, what's the first thing I'm not going to do when I don't have a job anymore? Greg, you retired what year? How long ago?
2018.
2018, and Dad, yours was?
2021.
2021. So has it been what y'all thought it would be over the last 4 years, over the last year or so? Has it been that, or what surprised you after you retired, if you will?
I think it has been. It's been nice. Time with family, trips that we've taken, that sort of thing. The thing that surprised me, how many people are still on the streets at 10 o'clock in the morning.
That's funny.
It's like, do these people work? It's amazing. But other than that, it's been good.
Good.
Enjoyed it.
Good. What about for you?
Yeah, had I known how good it was, I would have done it earlier. No, it's been great.
Good.
It gave me a sense that I kind of, even on my calendar, used to drive my life.
Yeah.
And now it kind of taught me that, a slower pace is not a sin.
That's good. That's good. Both your wives are still working. Is that right? Is Carrie still working?
Yes.
And I know my mom is still working a little bit. But y'all have gotten to do a lot. You travel together in the summers. I know both of y'all have taken some big trips. And so you've gotten to enjoy the fruits of your retirement a little bit. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what you're doing now. Because the reason I reached out to both of you is I'm really impressed by the ways that you're using the years after work to continue to work, but doing a different kind of work. So let me ask you this. Before we talk about what you're doing in your work now, was there ever a time you just rested? Because I know both of you, one of the things that motivated your retirement is like, man, I get to go serve and do something different and just not have to get paid to do it as much, right? But was there a time that you just rested, or did you feel like you immediately needed to fill and do that next thing? What did that look like for you, Greg?
For me, people that know me, I'm a pretty laid-back guy, so no, I had no issues resting. It's not a fact. I kind of laugh at Carrie. I bought this kitchen towel that hung on the oven handle for quite a while after I retired. It said, "For every man that's retired, there's a woman wishing he would go back to work."
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it had been an issue for me as far as the rest.
Good for you. What about you?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I think there was always a concern in my mind that I would get bored. And I never have gotten bored. But I got pretty busy into things, not rapidly, but
Pretty quick. Yeah. I know that was part of your processing of retirement. It's like, hey, what's the next thing I can do? And so I appreciate that, but I also know God calls us this idea of rest. What you said earlier is like being slowing down isn't a sin. If anything, it's a command of God to Sabbath and to rest. But like I said, both of y'all are doing some really cool things in retirement. So I'd love for our church family just to hear what you're doing. And maybe more importantly, not just what you're doing, but why you're doing what you're doing in retirement. So give us a little bit of both. Greg, start with you. What are you doing in your retirement, and what motivated you to do that thing?
Okay. Well, the year before 2017, before I retired, we had the flood, had Harvey, and our house flooded. So we were dealing with that. I got involved with 4B disaster response. Kind of through 8 Days of Hope was down 4 times in 2018, and I kind of started with them. And it wasn't until full-time, probably 2019, I started with 4B. And 4B is a group of churches that got together that, hey, we're all doing the same thing. Why don't we do this together? And so partnered together. Our Chris Alston is chairman of the board. And so basically, in a nutshell, what it is people that aren't able to, or could afford to rebuild their homes. 4B jumps in and does that. And what's cool about it is when you're at somebody's home, I found out early on it's personal. Yeah. It is very personal that you're in their home. And the fact that you're in their home to rebuild their home at no cost, it has a huge impact on them. So we're able to go in, have been into hundreds of homes, pray with the homeowners, and actually do something to help them out and get them down the road. And the gratitude is, over the roof.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's sit there for a second. So after Harvey in 2017, we learned quickly that everybody's going to jump in on the rescue, that immediate aftermath. Each church is kind of doing some of that relief effort, but the long-term recovery, like no one church can handle all of that. And so that's where 4B disaster response came in. Is like, we're going to be the long-term recovery. I saw an email this week that the goal is 500 homes, and they've been in, how many do you know the number? It's close to that.
It's 460.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I mean, that's completions.
Wow.
4B's been in over, I don't know, 1,000
probably.
homes.
Yeah. So how did the way the church responded to you and your family after you flood, how did that motivate you to then be in people's homes? You talked about that a little bit, but what was the personal impact that you and Carrie felt when the church rushed in and helped in the recovery?
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of hard to describe. I mean, it's, like I said, it's your home, it's personal, and you're there with this, I don't have a clue what to do next, and then boom, people show up and start doing, and it's like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's God in action.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So some of that, like personal, motivated you to do what you're now doing in retirement. And so let's talk about this. How much time have you donated? How much time have you given to that organization? What does that look like on a weekly rhythm for you or monthly rhythm? How often are you kind of working with 4B?
Well, 4B, I mean, their kind of work schedule's off on Mondays and work Tuesday through Saturday because people that come in to donate their time is usually on a Saturday.
Gotcha.
And so I generally work pretty much full time there.
Wow.
Not always on Saturdays, but a good portion of it.
Cool. And for those that don't know, we're still mobilizing volunteer base to go do that, right? There are churches that contribute volunteers that serve on a weekend to go do that with their small group or however.
Yeah, you think 5 years down the road and people are like, there's still people. Yeah, there's not as many, but and the work is everything: flooring, electrical, plumbing, drywall, roofing.
What was interesting for me is in the immediate aftermath of recovery in Harvey, you saw people who had the skill to do plumbing or electrical, and they were like excited to use the gifts that God had given them to serve other people. And even here, you talk about your career, like early on in construction and then working through going to school and project coordinating. Like God's able to use all of those things, even in your retirement, to serve 4B disaster response.
Sure.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened was in 2021, the freeze.
Yeah, that's right.
I won't go into the whole story of what was going on at 4B at the time, but when the freeze happened, it just kind of switched gears and started doing freeze homes. And I guess what reminded me of it, you're talking about people serving. We had plumbers from Arkansas that showed up for a week just because they wanted to serve.
Wow.
That came down to use their talents to serve during that period of time.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool to see. Dad, why don't you tell us a little bit about the same kind of thing? How are you using your retirement? What are you doing now with the time that God's given you?
Yeah, so I was really just looking for an opportunity to serve, and so things kind of came up, and then I had to go looking for a few. But at the church, I got with JB and his Wednesday group, and he comes up with projects to do around the church, just service projects, and that they're nothing, a lot of skills you needed to do that, but it's just fun to be with those guys and do things that are in need. And we were pretty active during the 528 kind of closeout over there almost every day, trying to get them to the finish line. That was really cool and exciting. Outside the church, got involved with this group called Youth for Christ. We were just kind of getting to know each other, and they didn't know me. I didn't really know them, and so we were in a lot of conversations. I ended up on their board, and so I served on their board for a while. And now after we got to know each other a little bit, kind of fit into one of their aspects is to reach out to 11 to 19-year-olds. And I'm in the juvenile center a couple times a week, doing Bible studies and just mentoring these guys and gals on occasion, to try and get them back to where they can be outside of the juvenile center and back into communities. So that was awesome. That doesn't look like spacesuit engineering, but it is something that God led me to, and I tell people it is some of the most humbling and blessing opportunities that I've probably ever had. So.
Yeah. That's what I was going to point out too, is like, Greg, a lot of your stuff lined up really well with what you did in your career to lead you to a place where you can now use those gifts. Some of what you did in your career, the strategic planning, mobilizing people, getting in the right position, you can do that on a board position at Youth for Christ. But being in a juvenile justice center is very different than what God had you doing in your career. Yep. So I know you've adjusted well to that. Maybe tell us just one story, don't use any names obviously, but like of a kid you've gotten to meet with or an impact you've been able to have by being the juvenile justice center and what's gone on there.
Okay. So most of these young men are in this program for about 6 to 8 months. And so when they come in, the first aspect is just kind of adjustment. They don't want to be there. They don't like this. And so you just got to be consistent. Just show up every time and let them know that you love them and you're there for them, anything they need. So one of the gentlemen, he went through that process and got to a point where I could just tell that he was more ready to receive some messages. And sometimes it's hard messages. We just go through Bible studies, mostly the Gospels, so they can see Christ's love for them. And I could see it was really sinking in. So the questions were coming back much more deep and put me, got to be on my toes here. Yeah. And he came to Christ.
That's awesome.
In the center.
Yeah.
And now he's talking about wanting to get baptized as soon as he gets out. And like, this is what we're all about. So that's awesome.
That is awesome. One of the things you and I have talked about is as kids come to faith there, like one of the most important parts is helping them get connected to a local church after. And, like the baptism, for example, is a role the local church will play to help that kid be connected to that local body and ask for recommendations for churches in Texas City and in Dickinson and Lee City. And so we've had a lot of those conversations. Put you on the spot. Tell me one more story. You talk about the chess piece thing. You've told me about this a little bit. If you can tell some of that story, I'd be interested.
So as an object lesson, one time I was there, I brought a chess piece. It's in my pocket.
Yeah.
It's a pawn. So the pawn, if you know anything about chess, and these guys play chess at the center a lot. Yeah. So that's kind of why I used it as an example. So the chess piece, the pawn is the weakest member on the board. It can only move one at a time, and really whatever the chess master moves, you just have to do it. And so I try and put that myself in that chess piece. You're just there doing whatever God wants you to do, one step at a time. Don't need to know why the big plan. He's got the big plan. But the pawn, when the chess master knows what he's doing, can go all across the board and become the queen.
Yeah.
And then you can do whatever God needs you to do. You have all the power that he's given you. And so I share that with them as an example for you guys in the room, the juvenile guys. Hey, you can do anything. God will strengthen you when you need to know it. And so almost weekly they ask me if I had the chess piece in my pocket. And I always do. And then when they get out and what they call graduation, I give them a chess piece.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think a lot of those guys look forward to that. It's like, I'm going to hold on to this piece as a reminder that, man, God's moving me one piece at a time. I don't always understand the story, but he has a plan. I'm willing to follow his plan.
That's the
awesome.
plan, hopefully.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm curious about this. Spiritually, how did retirement impact you? How did it change your relationship with God, with his church, not just in serving the church, but did retirement give you more space, more time? Did it increase your trust, or did it make your relationship with God more difficult? I'm curious about that.
I think for me, more space, able to spend more time, quiet time. So in that regard, that's how retirement impacted.
So positively impacted that?
Positive, yeah.
Good. What about you?
Yeah, I would say it would be positive. Obviously, you have more time.
Right.
You can prioritize the way it's better to serve. So that was not an issue. It has given me a little chance to do more seeking of him, and not just prepare for a lesson because I got to be a deadline on Tuesday nights, but it's what is that trying to teach me a little bit. So it's been great.
Cool. There is a little bit of that, though, right? As you prepare to teach, like you learn by teaching. And so, like, you go into the juvenile justice center, like, you're not preaching a sermon, but you kind of are every once in a while, you know? And so, like, that intentionality to learn in a way that you're going to share with others, maybe you didn't have the space in your schedule to do that when you were working full time, but now God's given you that. It's awesome. Well, I'm curious about this. We'll make this our last question, but from your vantage point, what wisdom do you have for the 35, 45-year-old guy that's in the middle of their career? So I'm asking selfishly. I'm at that part of my life. What wisdom would you give guys that are kind of in the fat middle of their career? We'll start with you, Greg.
I would say get into a regular Bible reading plan. And in that, you become closer to God. You get to know what God has for you. We've been talking about God's plans for you. Well, God's plans for you today as well as in the future. Yeah. So if you do that on a daily basis, and it just becomes your routine, then that's a daily routine with God, and you get a closeness and, the promptings as far as, guidance, which way I need to go. Mm-hmm. And church has an awesome reading plan. Yeah. It's basically all in one place and keeps track for you. And so that's
cool. We'll link that in the description of this podcast as well. But I feel that because I think there's times in the working world, I'm a type A personality. I like to set goals, accomplish things. Like the more stressed I am, the more I wake up with that thing on my mind, the more my quiet time gets condensed. And I'm rushing out to do the next thing, to accomplish the next thing. When in reality, I think your vantage point would say, no, slow down. Like spend good time with the Lord, slow down before you get to work. So that's really helpful.
Reminds me of John Ortberg's book, The Life You Always Wanted. There's one part in it when he's kind of at that point in his life, and he goes, the most godly man he knows, and he asks him, he says, so have you got any pointers for me? And he goes, yes, you need to eliminate hurry from your life. Yep. He said, my response was, that's a good one. What else you got?
I feel that. We've said this recently, but hurry is the opposite of love. Like you can't love people when you're in a hurry. You have to slow down. And so I have to preach that to myself regularly because I like to run fast. And so it's helpful. It's a good, helpful reminder, Greg. Dad, what about you? From your vantage point, what wisdom would you give somebody in the middle of their career?
I should have talked to Greg earlier. This is good answers. I like his answer a lot. I'd just say, love where you are. Live with all the blessings God given you right that day, because you don't know how many days you have. But then do plan a little bit. Look ahead. Get ready. Dream what it could be. Yeah. With good counseling from godly leaders and friends that you can trust and hold accountable to your plans. I think that's great.
Good.
I think that's great.
Good. Yeah, it's hard to think about what the future is when you're in the middle of it. It's like one of those things where you got to get outside of it to work on it a little bit when you're in the middle of working in it. It's one of the phrases we use a lot. So that's really helpful. I appreciate you guys thinking through that. Anything else we didn't cover? You're like, man, this is the most important thing in retirement. You didn't even ask me about it.
No, but I can remember one thing that as far as a tip, it kind of stuck with me. Dave Ramsey in his course said, when you're looking for a money manager, find one that has a heart for your money, not for their own. Oh, yeah. He said it's like 75-25 in their favor. So you need to, so that stuck.
That's wise. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, guys, thank you for joining me on the podcast. And I have a lot of respect for both of you men for the way you lead in the church, but also the way you lead in your homes. I obviously got to benefit from being a home that you've led for a long time. But the ways you're using your retirement to glorify God with your work is really impressive too. So thank you guys for jumping in.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, for our church family, I hope this has been a helpful conversation for you as well as we seek to honor God with our lives and redeem our work.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out clearcreekresources.org where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.